In the late 1940s, a heavy darkness settled over a quiet town in the United States. Whispers spread of a boy anonymous, unknown, who had fallen victim to forces no one could understand. He was only 14, but strange things began to happen around him. Strange enough that his family, desperate and terrified, turned to the Catholic Church for help. The boy was hidden under the pseudonym Roland Doe, and priests believed that what they faced was not a mere illness or hysteria, but something far more sinister. Father Raymond J. Bishop was among those who answered the call. His journal, filled with chilling details, spoke of objects moving on their own, violent fits of rage, and a voice that was not the boy's. Roland's suffering was profound, his eyes vacant, his voice carrying an otherworldly tone. It wasn't long before the church knew this was no ordinary case. They believed the boy was possessed by a demon. Over a series of grueling exorcisms, the priests battled an unseen enemy, fighting to reclaim Roland's soul. But the events that took place in that darkened room, the twisting of his body, the strange symbols that appeared on his skin, left everyone who witnessed them changed forever. Years later, in 1971, those very accounts would inspire William Peter Blatty's chilling novel, The Exorcist. But even as the story grew into a terrifying tale known to millions, Roland's true identity remained a secret until December 2021. It was then that the skeptical Inquirer uncovered the truth behind the name Roland Doe. His real name was Ronald Edwin Hunkeler. He had lived quietly in the shadows, avoiding the legacy of what haunted him, until his death on May 10, 2020. Even in death, his story lingers like a shadow at the edge of reality, a reminder that some secrets never rest easily, and some stories are never truly over. Ronald Hunkeler was born into a quiet German Lutheran family in 1935. Their home, nestled in Cottage City, Maryland, seemed like any other, with its calm streets and everyday rhythms. But beneath the surface, something darker was taking root. Ronald, an only child, had always been close to his Aunt Harriet. She was more than just family. She was his playmate and his guide to worlds unseen. Harriet, a spiritualist, had introduced Ronald to the mysteries of the Ouija board when his curiosity about the unknown grew. She taught him how to use it, how to open the door between this world and something else. But in early January of 1949, just after Harriet passed away, something began to change in Ronald's life. It started with noises, scratching sounds that came from the walls and floors of his bedroom late at night. The house was still, but something was stirring. Water began to drip inexplicably from the walls, though there were no leaks, no broken pipes. Soon, the forces that had been hiding in the shadows revealed themselves. His mattress would jolt and shift beneath him, as though something unseen was trying to pull him away. Furniture moved on its own, crashing into walls, and a portrait of Jesus that hung over his bed would shake violently, as if warning of what was to come. The activity always centered around Ronald's room, and it wasn't long before his screams filled the house at night. His mother would rush in, only to find herself witnessing the same horrors, an invisible force wreaking havoc in their home, tormenting her son. Desperate for answers, the Hunkelers sought help from doctors and psychiatrists. They ran every test imaginable, but no one could explain the bizarre happenings. 1 month after Harriet's death, something even more disturbing began to occur. Markings started to appear on Ronald's body. The first spelled out Lewis, etched into his skin like a burn. Frantic and unsure of what to do, the family turned to the tool that had first connected Ronald to his aunt, the Ouija board. They tried to reach Harriet's spirit, hoping she could offer them answers from beyond. But whatever they reached out to was not Harriet. When they asked for proof that it was really her, a chair was flung violently across the room. The next morning, Ronald woke up with fresh welts burned into his legs, as though something had attacked him in the night. Convinced that something demonic was at play, the family reached out to their Lutheran pastor, Luther Miles Schultz, a man with an interest in parapsychology. Schultz arranged for Ronald to spend a night in his home, hoping to observe the strange phenomena for himself. What he saw was beyond explanation. Furniture moved, objects flew through the air, all under the watch of an unseen force. Schultz, shaken but uncertain, suggested the family see a Catholic priest, sensing they were dealing with something far beyond his understanding. Before they could act, the Hunkelers attempted to escape, fleeing their home in the hope that the dark presence would remain behind. But wherever they went, the terror followed. It clung to Ronald like a shadow, creeping into every new place they tried to find solace. With no other options, they reached out to Father Bowden, a priest at their local Catholic church. At first, Bowden was skeptical possession was a rare and dangerous thing to assume. But when he arrived at the Hunkelers' home to pray over Ronald, he witnessed something that changed everything. Alongside Bishop Raymond, he began to pray, and almost immediately, Ronald screamed in agony. He tore at his chest, crying out that it was burning. When they opened his shirt, they saw fresh markings gouged into his skin symbols they didn't understand. The priests prayed through the night from 11 p.m. until the first light of dawn. What they saw convinced them beyond doubt this was a true possession. The only way to save Ronald now was through an exorcism, but the rite could not be performed without permission from the Archbishop of St. Louis. The priests sent their request. But the Archbishop had one chilling demand. They must document every moment of the exorcism, every twist, every scream, every encounter with the darkness that had taken hold of Ronald Hunkeler's soul. And so the priests prepared for battle, knowing they were facing something far older and more terrifying than anything they had ever known. The first 5 days of the exorcism were brutal and unpredictable. In the shadowy hours of night, young Ronald Hunkeler lay bound to his bed, wrists tied to prevent him from lashing out, yet the darkness that had a hold on him was far stronger than the priests had anticipated. On one of those terrifying nights, Ronald managed to slip one hand free from the restraints. His body, possessed by a force beyond comprehension, found strength no boy his age should have. With a quick, violent motion, Ronald took this opportunity and punched the priest, breaking the priest's nose. Blood gushed from the priest's nose as he cried out in pain. Ronald's distorted laughter filled the room, and the ritual was abruptly halted. The boy's father wrestled control back, pinning Ronald down long enough for the priest to regain their composure. But what truly chilled them was the unnatural strength the boy exhibited, strength far beyond his frail body. The following day, Ronald slept through most of the prayers, his body limp as the priests performed the rituals. For a fleeting moment, hope blossomed in the room. They believed this quiet meant the exorcism was working, that the demon was weakening. But that hope crumbled the moment the priests left. As the sun set, Ronald's screams pierced the house once again, wild and relentless. He screamed for hours, his voice ragged and hoarse, shaking the walls of the house. His parents, exhausted and terrified, could only wait for the priests to return the next morning. With their arrival, the ritual resumed, and the tension in the air was suffocating. For 4 long, grueling hours they prayed, each word heavy with desperation. The room filled with a thick, oppressive heat, and then suddenly, Ronald began to violently dry heave, as if something monstrous was trying to escape from within him. "Open the window," he screamed, his voice no longer his own, frantic and wild. His parents, shaken but obedient, threw open the window, letting in the cold, fresh air. Ronald calmed, his breathing slowed, and for a moment, it felt as though the evil had left him. The priests exchanged wary glances, believing they had triumphed. But there was something they had forgotten. Sometimes the devil lies in wait, retreating only to return stronger. At 2 a.m., the household was once again plunged into chaos. Ronald's screams echoed through the dark, jolting his parents awake. Desperate, they called the priests, who hurried back to resume the battle. By 3:15 a.m., the exorcism was underway once more, and this time, the boy was different. He screamed and taunted the priests, mocking them, his voice twisted and distorted, as if something else was speaking through him. The night dragged on, his defiance rising and falling like waves. In the early hours of the morning, his body finally collapsed into a catatonic state, falling limp as though whatever was inside him had drained all his energy. But the battle was far from over. The next day passed in a tense, unsettling quiet. It wasn't until nightfall, just before 8:30 p.m., that the eerie knocking sounds began, reverberating through the house. Ronald's screams followed soon after, as though they were in perfect sync with the pounding, and by 9 p.m., the priests had returned to continue the fight. That night, Ronald exhibited strength far beyond anything they had seen before. His body convulsed violently, and his voice, no longer his own, barked and growled, a demonic chorus of two voices coming from his mouth at once. His family, now pushed to the brink of their sanity, could take no more. Tears filled their eyes as they watched their son transform before them, consumed by a darkness they couldn't fight. The priests, sensing their despair, knew the exorcism had to continue somewhere else, away from the fragile walls of the Hunkeler home. It was decided that Ronald would be moved to a hospital run by an order of Catholic monks, the Alexian Brothers Hospital in South St. Louis, Missouri. The family agreed, desperate for an end to the nightmare. When they arrived at the hospital, they hoped for a reprieve, but the evil that plagued Ronald had followed. The staff soon began to witness strange phenomena, flickering lights, eerie whispers, objects moving without cause. The presence of the boy became so disruptive that he was moved to a private room, isolated on a floor above the psychiatric ward. There, in the cold silence of the hospital, the exorcism would continue, an unseen battle between heaven and hell, with a 14-year-old boy caught in its merciless grip. Before the next exorcism ritual, another priest was summoned to the hospital, Father Walter Halloran. His role was to assist Father Bowden, as the intensity of the events had escalated beyond anything the priests had expected. Alongside them was a third Jesuit, Father William Van Roo, who offered support and would often visit Ronald during the quieter moments between exorcisms. One day, Father Halloran gifted the boy a bottle of holy water, leaving it on the bedside table. But as he turned to leave, the bottle suddenly flew across the room, crashing into the wall with a force that sent shards scattering across the floor. When the ritual resumed, Ronald immediately began to scream, his voice twisted with rage and hatred. His eyes fixed on Father Halloran, and with a sneer, he spat venomous words. "Your mother says hello from the depths of hell." The room grew colder as the hours dragged on, Ronald's body convulsing violently before collapsing into a catatonic state. The following day, the exorcism took an even darker turn. Ronald was more violent than ever, thrashing wildly as all three priests struggled to hold him down. He spat a foul-smelling liquid at them, his mouth contorting into grotesque shapes as curses poured from him in a language they didn't understand. As Father Halloran held him, Ronald screamed that he was being hurt, and out of mercy, the priest loosened his grip. It was a mistake he would instantly regret. Ronald seized the opportunity to lash out, punching Father Halloran in the face and breaking his nose. Blood poured from the priest's injury, and the ritual was stopped for the day. Exhausted and defeated, the priests left, their spirits as broken as their bodies. The exorcism continued in the days that followed, each session more terrifying than the last. Objects would fly across the room, seemingly guided by an invisible hand. Ronald's behavior grew more grotesque. He began urinating during the rituals, further desecrating the sacred space. And then, on the 18th day, something chilling happened. Ronald, his voice low and raspy, began to write on a piece of paper. The words sent shivers down the spines of the priests. "I am the devil himself, and within 10 days, I will give you a sign." Moments after he finished, he let out a blood-curdling scream. An X began to carve itself into his chest, the skin parting as though by an unseen blade. The priests realized with horror that the X represented 10 in Roman numerals, a countdown to something far worse. Shaken by this latest manifestation, Father Bowden decided it was time to baptize Ronald. The following day, he performed the baptism, hoping the sacred act would bring peace to the boy. For a brief moment, it seemed to work. Ronald was calm, his breathing steady. But just 10 minutes later, the fits returned, more violent than before. His body twisted in unnatural ways, and the priests could do nothing but continue the ritual. In the following days, the horror deepened. As the priests prayed, the words "exit" appeared, carved into Ronald's flesh as though burned by some demonic hand. They were horrified, but they did not stop. They couldn't. The battle was nearing its end, though they didn't yet realize how close it truly was. On the final day of the exorcism, the priests arrived at the hospital to an unsettling sight. From outside, they saw the lights on Ronald's floor flickering erratically, though the rooms were empty. The receptionist, pale and shaking, broke down in tears as she explained that the hospital had become a place of chaos. Patients were restless, and staff had reported strange occurrences throughout the building. The priests made their way to Ronald's room. A strong stench of sulfur thickened the air, a bitter, acrid smell that clung to their clothes and filled their lungs. As they entered the room, Ronald immediately began to scream, but this time in Latin, a language he had never known. His voice was guttural, distorted, not entirely his own. He shouted that this was his sign, his proof that he was indeed the devil. One of the priests, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him, challenged the entity. "Prove it," he demanded. Ronald's eyes gleamed with a dark amusement, and he smiled, a twisted, malicious grin. Reaching out, he touched the priest's purple vestment, and to everyone's shock, the fabric began to unravel, disintegrating into nothing as if burned by acid. The priests knew they were facing the endgame. They prayed harder, more fervently than they ever had before. But Ronald's strength surged, and in a terrifying moment, one of the bed springs shot up through the mattress. With unnatural precision, Ronald grabbed it and lunged, attempting to stab Father Bowden. They wrestled the makeshift weapon from him, but the boy continued to curse, spit, and fight, his body now levitating off the bed, hovering a few feet in the air as the demonic voice bellowed from within him. The room shook as if it were being torn apart from the inside. Hours passed, and just as hope began to fade, Ronald suddenly stopped. His eyes rolled back, his breathing heavy and labored. In a strained, weak voice, he spoke of a vision he claimed to see the Archangel Michael wielding a flaming sword, driving the demon out of him, forcing it to retreat back into the abyss from which it had come, and then silence. The room stilled, the heavy air lifting as though the weight of the world had been removed. Ronald's body fell back onto the bed, limp and fragile. Whatever had haunted him for weeks, whatever evil had possessed his soul, was gone. But the memory of what happened in that room, of what lurked just beyond the veil of reality, would linger forever in the minds of those who witnessed the exorcism. The exorcism of young Ronald Hunkeler lasted for 28 long, harrowing days. By the end of it, the boy had returned to normal, as if waking from a terrible nightmare. He would go on to live an ordinary life, but the events that transpired during those 4 weeks left an indelible mark on those who witnessed them. According to accounts, a total of 48 people were present for various stages of the exorcism, 9 of them Jesuit priests. The terror that unfolded in that hospital room in 1949. By mid-1949, several newspaper articles began to circulate, detailing the anonymous story of a boy possessed and the exorcism that followed. The source of these reports was believed to be Luther Miles Schultz, the family's former pastor, who had seen the early stages of Ronald's torment. As the story spread, it took on a life of its own, captivating the public's imagination. However, despite the attention, proof of Ronald's possession was elusive. The story seemed to balance on the knife edge between belief and skepticism. Jesuit priest Father Walter H. Halloran, one of the last surviving eyewitnesses to the exorcism, often expressed doubts about the supernatural aspects of the case. According to author Thomas B. Allen, who chronicled the events, Halloran was hesitant to declare definitively that the boy had been possessed by malevolent spirits. "No, I can't go on record," Halloran once said in an interview. "I never made an absolute statement about the things because I didn't feel I was qualified." Even with the chaos and the inexplicable phenomena he had seen, Halloran remained cautious, unwilling to fully embrace the idea that the supernatural had taken hold of Ronald. Yet others were more convinced. Father Bowden, who had led the exorcism, had no such reservations. When approached years later by author William Peter Blatty, Bowden was steadfast in his belief about what had occurred in that darkened room. "I had no doubt about it then," Bowden said, "and I have no doubt about it now. What was in that room that night was the otherworldly force we call the devil in the flesh." Blatty, captivated by the priest's certainty and the eerie details of the exorcism, took the story and transformed it into his 1971 novel, The Exorcist. Drawing from the unsettling events of Ronald's possession, Blatty's book became an instant sensation. The terrifying tale of a young girl possessed by a demon struck a chord with readers, and it wasn't long before the story made its way to the silver screen. The film adaptation, released in 1973, would become one of the most iconic and chilling horror movies of all time. Though Ronald Hunkeler would go on to live in relative obscurity, his story, the story of Roland Doe, the boy once believed to be possessed, became immortalized in fiction. The exorcism, witnessed by dozens and recounted by those who dared, would forever blur the lines between reality and the supernatural, leaving behind a legacy of fear and fascination that endures to this day. The story of Ronald Hunkeler's possession has captivated audiences for decades, but it has also drawn the scrutiny of skeptics. In his 1993 book, Possessed, The True Story of an Exorcism, author Thomas B. Allen suggests that Robbie wasn't the victim of demonic forces, but rather a deeply disturbed boy. Allen, echoing the opinions of modern experts, concluded that nothing supernatural was involved. Mark Upsasnik, another skeptic, dug deeper into the details surrounding the case and came to an even more critical conclusion. He proposed that Ronald was simply a troubled boy who acted out in order to gain attention. Upsasnik interviewed eyewitnesses and uncovered numerous discrepancies in the widely accepted narrative. For instance, Halloran, one of the priests present at the exorcism, never heard Ronald's voice change into something demonic, and he believed the boy was merely mimicking the Latin he had overheard. Halloran also reportedly failed to inspect Ronald's fingernails when markings appeared on the boy's body, leaving open the possibility that Ronald made them himself. Even more troubling, Upsasnik found no evidence of some of the most dramatic claims, such as the story of Father Hughes attempting an exorcism at Georgetown Hospital, or being injured by Ronald. Furthermore, Upsasnik revealed that many of the reports about Ronald's possession came from unreliable sources and were never properly fact-checked. Skeptic Joe Nickel also weighed in, asserting that the signs of possession scratches, levitation, furniture moving were easily fabricated by a clever and determined teenager. He dismissed claims of supernatural strength, suggesting that they were the exaggerated reactions of those caught up in the moment. Nickel concluded that nothing in the case of Ronald's possession was beyond what an agitated boy could accomplish through trickery. So, was Ronald Hunkeler truly possessed by a demon, or was this simply a case of psychological disturbance and elaborate hoaxes? The truth remains elusive, buried in conflicting accounts and the passage of time. While some, like Father Bowden, remained convinced that they faced the devil himself, skeptics argue that the tale has been distorted by sensationalism and embellishment. What do you think? Was the possession of Ronald fact or fiction? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this haunting tale and want to hear more creepy stories, be sure to subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay haunted.